Hi, Maxim.
Привіт, Valeria. How are you?
I'm okay. I think it's a little bit bittersweet today because it's our last episode of the season. And we've done so many over the past year and a half. Season three, I can't believe we've done three seasons since the full-scale invasion. And we're at the end of the third one, which makes me very emotional. But also made me think of like all the feedback we've been getting from people over the past months, and before that even. I think our patrons started supporting us from the very beginning, right?
Yeah, I think we launched the Patreon page at maybe a month or two in, and I think the majority of Patreon sponsors that came in, the core of it are still with us, which is amazing and humbling, and I'm so very grateful for their continuous support.
Yeah, and it actually made me so Tatiana and Solomia from our team send us sometimes screenshots of the messages, and Maxim and I check as well from time to time the stuff that we get on Patreon, on Instagram, on Twitter. So we're seeing all your comments, all your feedback, and I thought it would be nice for us at the beginning of our last episode to read some of them, if that's okay with you.
Yes, yes, please.
So one of our patrons messaged us saying that I have been listening to your show as a podcast for a while, and I find it very inspiring. I feel so much rage and heartbreak since February 24th, and your podcast helps me process these feelings. Today, these feelings intensified again, and as well as sending donations, they motivated me to become a patron. I know it's just a drop in the ocean, but perhaps it can make the pain of today a tiny bit more bearable. Heartfelt hugs and Slava Ukraini. And it's just amazing to get this feedback from people who join us, because sometimes it feels like it's like as Maxim says, like a therapy session for Maxim and I. But I actually, it's so amazing to see that other people can also process what they're going through and what they're feeling with the help of our podcast. So thank you so much. I'm gonna read another one from a listener. I'm blown away by this podcast, really educational and important for Westerners to hear. Made me realize just how wrong the conversations around Ukraine have been and how few Ukrainian voices have been featured in traditional media. Thank you for your work on the podcast and outside. Slava Ukraini. So you see, Maxim, I think we're reaching our intended target audiences. There are multiple, both Ukrainians who want to understand more about themselves, but also people in the West who want to actually trust Ukrainian voices in their journey on learning more about our country. So I think that's been amazing.
Well,
But
still, Ukrainian
how?
voices are largely marginalized, so I think our mission is still not done, unfortunately. I would love to be done one day, and we can just, pack and go and say, this job is done. Ukrainian voices are mainstream, but unfortunately, a year and a half into this genocide, we're still facing the same problems we faced on the day first when we launched this podcast and the show. So, yeah, thank
Although
you so much for sharing that.
I do like to think that the situation has gotten better and people have started listening more. I think on a large scale, it's probably not where we want it to be, but I do think that things have started to shift. And even like, reading reviews like this from people who listen to us who, maybe before wouldn't have necessarily come across Ukrainian voices like ours, like those of our guests have been. Reading and finding and listening and watching a lot more from people who know and have lived through a lot of these experiences that we're talking about. But how are you, Maxim? Sorry, I didn't ask you in the beginning.
No worries. Maybe it's for better because I'm always on like a bit of Debbie Downer side of the things. But before we went into this final episode of the season three about decolonization, I was really listening a lot to this emerging and fantastic Ukrainian artist and singer Maria Kvitka, and I think her story inspired me a lot that I wanted to share before we go to this episode. For me, at least personally, it explains why we've been doing this season a lot.
Зійшла чорна хмара, а за
So to be super brief, she won this Ukrainian singing contest, has powerful magical voice, but she's really into folk songs. So she works in archives and uses old poetry to incorporate in her songs. And a lot of people said to her, like, this folk thing, it will make you niche. I mean, you need to go like large pop music. Why would you do that? And she still, stuck to it. And fast forward to now, I think she has all the popularity, even more than anyone would expect, but she still does her thing. But her songs, for me, despite being old and folk songs, they ring completely different bell. Like, I do understand what she's singing about, and they do not sound old. You know what I mean? It's probably because our own perspective shifted so much about our roots, reconnecting with our roots, understanding that the people 200, 300 years ago were singing the same songs that are relevant now, which is a bit depressing, but at the same time, we understand what's at stake today. And I think this reconnection is in essence our decolonization, is in essence us reconnecting with who we really are.
I just wanted to add that before we actually had an episode with Stas and Marichka from UA Explainers where we said that, like, it's actually so bizarre that in school we used to read poetry and things like that, of Ukrainian poetry, and like not really feel anything that was like, I don't know how to explain it, but like it wasn't this visceral feeling of like, oh my God, I know what these poets were writing about and talking about. And it's only now that like we're going through this crazy experience, absolutely like one we didn't imagine we would ever go through, that you read and look back and listen back and really like realize and understand that we've been talking about similar things and experiences now for a very long time. But yes, so talk about this episode. Why are we here talking today with our wonderful guests about Kazakhstan?
I think we did, this is going to be 9th episode, and we did so many powerful stories in this season. They're almost like duels that basically go together and fit together very nicely, of people sharing their personal stories, how they're reconnecting with themselves, with their roots, but also how it's connected to their missions and the important work that they do. But those stories are mostly from Ukrainians. And I thought that it's exceptionally powerful when we always feature in these bridge episodes our allies and friends who share similar experiences but are not Ukrainians. And for this specific, for season finale, we wanted to share stories of our Kazakh friends, because coming from very different backgrounds and culturally, geographically, we still share so much in common, and so much that has happened to Ukraine tragically in the last 1.5 years inspired so many Kazakhs to go on a powerful decolonization journeys as well.
It's now time to finally welcome our amazing guests. And as always, I love saying this, and I will never get tired of repeating it. We have one golden rule, which is to ask our guests to introduce themselves to our audiences the way that they feel they would like to be introduced, and to tell the audiences what they think is important to know about them. So please welcome Yevgeniya first, and then Azamat.
Thank you so much, Valeria. It's a pleasure to be on your show because I was listening for it since one of the first episodes. And what I wanted to say that since February 24 last year, my heart is breaking every day. And I learned to live with that, but I really hope that it will stop soon. I'm a former journalist and activist. Why former? Because mostly my most professional efforts are now concentrated in NGO sector. But speaking personally about myself outside of professional life, I really like telling people about Kazakh contemporary culture in my free time. And all my friends can confirm it because I sit and gradually turning them into fans of Kazakh music and Kazakh film.
Azamat, would you mind please introducing yourself to our audiences?
All right. First of all, Valeria, Maxim, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor for me. I have been following your work and I'm always blown away by the impact you guys have and how many people you educate. So it's a privilege for me to be on your show. Thank you so much for having me. About myself, I was born and raised in Kazakhstan, in Almaty. Currently I'm a professor of sociology at a private liberal arts college in Southern California, in a town called Claremont. It's 30 miles outside Los Angeles. My research interests have to do with Central Asia, and most of my work actually has been using public opinion data from Central Asia and sort of analyzing it to look at patterns of public opinion when it comes to issues of inequality, social inequality, economic inequality, political inequality, stratification. But all this work is definitely very quantitative in nature. It's something where I get large grants, then I use the money to hire public opinion research companies to carry out these representative sort of studies for me, big samples. All this to say that it was very academic, very much arm's length. And I think for me personally, since February 24th, something fascinating has been happening where I've been thinking more and more about my own personal story, my own circumstances, my family's circumstances. And it's been this kind of a wild journey, honestly. And it feels very different from my usual stuff, right? So I've been trying to write a little bit on Twitter about some of this, right? Just trying to reassess, rethink my own situation. And I am just at the start of the journey, and voices like yours are really guiding it in many ways.
Evgeny, if I can ask you quite a similar question, because honestly, I don't think you mind me sharing it with a larger audience, but we know each other for many years. But I told you before as well that the way I, started to know you in the last year and a half, it's completely different from all those years we knew each other before. And I appreciate our friendship and our connection much more. But partially, I think it's because of your own journey that you're going through, similar to what Azamat has been saying. So if you don't mind sharing with everyone else how your life has changed and why, Ukraine and the strategy in Ukraine started, forced you to question who you are as well.
Actually, for 1.5 years, more and more, I've been looking into my family history, just as Azamat mentioned, and was thinking about who I am and where do I belong. And yes, I have to mention that I live in Prague, Czech Republic for 6 years, outside of Kazakhstan for quite a long time. And my self-discovery journey, I think, have started about 10 years ago, and it's still going on. The most difficult thing for me is to present myself, who I am. It is very strange, and I think many of people of different ethnicities born in Kazakhstan, of mix of ethnicities, would relate to that. When you tell people that you're from Kazakhstan, people start questioning, oh, you look so Slavic. You're not, you don't look like a Kazakh person. And then you start explaining that Kazakhstan is a multi-ethnic country. We have a lot of different ethnicities, and you can be Kazakh being of different ethnicity because we have very diverse society. And for me, it was a long journey to say that I'm Kazakh, and that's how I feel like, because I believe that's my culture, that's the culture I was born and brought up in. And when people think that automatically I should be Russian, I start protesting, my cheeks start getting red, and I really feel very uncomfortable explaining my background. Well, because my family is quite mixed. My mom was born in Russia, but she moved to Kazakhstan when she was 8, and she was brought up in Kazakhstan. On my father's side, I have Greek, Polish, and Ukrainian. My grandfather was Ukrainian. He was deported to Kazakhstan with his family in the beginning of 20th century. So my family history is very complicated. It's full of tragedy, and it is hard for me to relate to any ethnicity that's within my blood, because I was brought up in Kazakh culture, and that, I think, how culturally I belong. My great-grandfather, Polish, he was enemy of the state in the USSR. Of course, he was rehabilitated, but this is also a big trauma in my family, and that my family tries to kind of erase from the memory and not talk about it. I was brought up by my great-grandmother, who spoke Kazakh to me. When I was a kid, I spoke Kazakh to our family's friends, and particularly the grandfather Makulbai, with whom we really like to chat in Kazakh. And this tragedy, I think, intensified when the war in Ukraine has started for me, and I feel more and more connected with Kazakh culture, with my home country. The war in Ukraine, the genocide that is happening, I think it made us think how our stories of our countries were untold to full extent. And in many cases, people don't understand what was going on in our countries under the Soviet rule and what ordinary people were facing.
What I was interested in is to hear your perspectives, Azamat and Genia yourself, about, the Soviet Union has been over for more than 30 years. I was just curious to hear, why do you think for people from Kazakhstan, from people from other countries as well, this full-scale invasion, 24th of February, was the turning point in understanding ourselves better? And I wanted to ask Azamat specifically, how have you personally been? I know you mentioned that you started looking into your own understanding of your identity and understanding of the history of your country, your your family and things like that. But could you tell us a little bit more about this journey that you've been on since Russia brutally invaded Ukraine?
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much. Yes, I am afraid I have to go back quite a bit for the story to make sense. So, as I mentioned, I was born and raised in Almaty in Kazakhstan. I'm 47 now. I was about 16 when the Soviet Union collapsed. And looking back, I realized that my family was relatively privileged. I was sort of, I'm an ethnic Kazakh, but I grew up in the central part of Almaty, went to the schools in the central part of Almaty. And back in sort of the early 80s, right, when I started elementary school in Almaty, which even back then had over 1 million inhabitants and, over 100 schools, there were only 2 schools where Kazakh was the language of instruction. Right. So Almaty itself was about 20% Kazakh, right? So 4 out of 5 kids in any school in central Almaty would have been not Kazakh, right? And so I went to Russian schools my entire life. My family actually is quite Russified. So my mom and her siblings, they were all born in the 1940s and none of them speak Kazakh, right? So those are just facts that I grew up with. But what I've been thinking about recently, right, is how this fact of being so Russified, right, just being Russian speakers, having no Kazakh, and for me, having no interest in learning Kazakh or using Kazakh, or actually having disdain for all things Kazakh, was completely normal, right? It was just something I never questioned, never stopped to think about. And in fact, I remember when I was young and, when there would be some social situation where people would question me, they would look at me and, I look Kazakh, right? But they would try to sort of talk to me in Kazakh and I couldn't respond. And when someone would try to sort of question me about this or, criticize perhaps, it just irritated me. I just thought, oh, how dare they, right? So, but looking back, what I'm realizing, being in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia, specifically in Almaty, right? Having flawless Russian, right? Being thoroughly immersed in Russian culture, Russian literature, Russian music, for a Kazakh person was a sign of higher status, right? That's just the truth of it. And so it was a marker of status. And any Kazakh person who had even the slightest hint of a Kazakh accent in a Russian, it marked them as someone that comes from a village, right? And village means lower status. For your listeners, it's important to understand that because of the Soviet policies in Kazakhstan, Kazakhs were concentrated in certain parts of the country and also mostly really in rural areas, whereas urban areas, certainly the capital at the time, Almaty, was heavily Russian, and urban areas in general were heavily Russian. And so being Kazakh who has zero Kazakh language skill, has zero interest in Kazakh language, has disdain for Kazakh culture, that was me, right? And it never bothered me. I never questioned it. I was sort of smug about it. And it so happened that I've lived much of my adult life in the US. And when people would ask me, are you Russian? I would say, no, I'm not Russian, right? But you speak Russian. And I need to explain. And I, would say, oh, Soviet Union, legacy of the Soviet Union. Again, never really stopped to think about it. Honestly, even more personally, I have, from my first marriage, my 3 children, their mom is American. And we at home had to, try to make sure they're bilingual. And so the rule at home was that the kids are not supposed to use English with me. And I worked my worked very hard, right? I worked very hard to make sure they're bilingual, but the language I was able to give them was my mother tongue, which is Russian, which is ironic and horrible at the same time, right? But that's been my reality. And I think since February 24th, I've had this growing realization that in my case, this was really just some kind of internalized racism. I don't know if that's the right term, but certainly a self-hatred almost, right? So I'm an ethnic Kazakh who, looks down on Kazakh language and Kazakh culture. But it also, as a sociologist, it made me think, is it just me with my broken mind, or was there something about the society at the time, how we grew up, that I have somehow inhaled this disdain, this attitude? And I think it is the latter. And so I've been trying to unwind it. I'm in Kazakhstan now for the summer. I've been trying to use my very broken, very basic Kazakh whenever I can in social situations, but it's hard. And I no longer feel smug about being a flawless Russian speaker in Kazakhstan. That time has long passed.
It's something that I know I am for sure, but also Lydia relates so much. I think when we talk with your friends all the time about the language and about our identity confusion when we started on this journey, is something that is closely related to understanding how Russian colonialism works and how basically messes up with our understanding who we are, that we do not understand what language we should be speaking. We do not understand where we come from, what we should be proud of. We know just one thing, that anything Russian is superior. That's how we're conditioned to be. And I'm very grateful for you to share these very personal, very painful stories of you trying to regain your voice back. But I also probably wanted to ask Zhenya to share her own experience with Russian language and being similarly brought up Russian speaking, despite of her very diverse background. How would you explain to the rest of the world how Russian has been used in your life and in life of your community in your country to assert Russian control and Russian cultural hegemony over anything indigenous?
I recently was asked actually by a Czech tour guide once on a sightseeing tour with my niece, how Russian language works in Kazakhstan. And yeah, I started explaining something that was Azamat was talking about, that the Russian-speaking population is concentrated in the big cities because their Soviet powers were pushing Russian language. Most of the school were Russian language schools, and we, as a surprise, were studying Kazakh language as a foreign language. I think we even had more classes of English rather than classes of Kazakh in the big cities. Whereas when you go outside outside Almaty, you need Kazakh language. 2 years ago, I was visiting my family for 3 months for summer, and we went out also on a sightseeing tour outside Almaty, and we were staying in sort of a guest house with the owners, and the group that was staying there, most of them didn't speak any Kazakh, and our hosts didn't speak any Russian. So of course my Kazakh is not perfect. I try not to forget it because it's been a while since I was using it, but I was the sort of the bridge between this group of Russian speaking people from the city and our hosts. And this is such strange and heartbreaking situation. And we were talking to our host, and she said, well, I hope my kids will learn Russian and will go to the city, because this is no way to get a good life. And I was thinking how unjust this situation is, that you need to learn foreign language to get a good life in your own country. And this is heartbreaking, but I think we're on a path of changing and making Kazakh language stronger and more widespread. I think in the next 10 years we will have a drastic change of the language policy. That's my expectation. Of course, Russian will not disappear, but I think that Kazakh will be the main language that people speak. And I think that since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, many I was speaking to many non-ethnic Kazakhs in my home country, and everybody wants to learn Kazakh, or they started learning, or they are in a process. They're using more Kazakh language in their day-to-day life. And every time you have to explain people how it happened, and that you're not from Russia, and Kazakhstan is not part of Russia. And yes, we have Kazakh language. Yes, it is close. It's a Turkic group of languages, and you just have to give this very, very long explanation to people for them to understand why there are two languages in the country, why Russian language is dominant. This is how it is.
Oh my God, it's every Ukrainian can relate, I think, or most of us for sure.
Yeah, I was just gonna say absolutely the same. And also the fact that isn't it so beautiful and interesting how much we feel for the languages that, you know, for Ukrainian, for Kazakh, for it just connects us to our identity so much. And I've been feeling it this year as well, like myself speaking Ukrainian much more than I ever have before in my life, you know, speaking Ukrainian now even with my family. It just makes you so much more in tune with your own history, your own stories, your own kind of even like this national spirit of resistance almost just through the language. I wanted to ask Azamat, you've previously described your relationship and your sort of feeling towards the Kazakh language before as the colonized conscience, and also your relationship to the culture as a child. And I wanted to ask you, how are you actively relearning things about yourself and your childhood, and also how do you inform your children about this relationship to Kazakh culture as a result of your own journey?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a hard question. I'm afraid I don't have a short or even a complete answer. I am trying to pick up Kazakh. I'm trying to use more Kazakh. I wish I could say like you that I am using Kazakh with family these days, or speaking Kazakh more myself. In my case, it's unfortunately it's the language. I cannot say that in my family it's completely lost, but it's past the point where we can just make the choice just to use Kazakh, because in my family's case it's been almost completely wiped out, right? So, and it's just the most bizarre feeling, right? It's actually makes me think of the essay by Ukrainian writer Sasha Davzhuk, right, about the language, and she has this sentence that's been haunting me. It says, "Russian is my mother tongue, and liberation means ripping it out of my throat," right? And so that's literally the case for me, except the only other language I can actually function in is English. And, but when I'm back home here in Almaty, I try, when I go out to the grocery store, or I talk to, to cab drivers, just regular people, right? I try to use Kazakh. I feel incredibly self-conscious doing so because I know my grammar is atrocious. And people, just today, someone asked me, "Are you Kazakh?" Right? When they tried to engage with me in Kazakh, and I couldn't respond. And so it feels awful, honestly, right? So I feel like against my wishes, almost against my own desires, I am still using Russian every day with my loved ones, right? With people around, and it just feels like a violation. I can't. I mean, it's not practical for me to switch to English when I'm here. So I keep using Russian, and then the truth is, with my children, it's easy to give them English because we live in California, and English is not a problem. But I'm it makes me sweat just thinking about it. Like I am basically reduced to speaking to my children in Russian. It's just incredibly painful. It's like I know I have this object stuck in me and I cannot take it out. It's incredibly awful.
Being truthful and honest about essentially how you feel about this journey that you're on. And I think it also takes strength and courage to be able to even, express, because maybe someone will listen to this episode to both of you and will be able to take this forward for themselves as well. So thank you so much for doing that.
I think our family stories we've been sharing, and a lot of Ukrainians who come on Ukrainian Spaces also shared the same, because there are a lot of Russian-speaking families, right? And your closest people to you sometimes speak Russian or other language from you. And it was really, and it's still painful for a lot to relearn and reconnect and rebuild that intimacy with each other through new language, because using the old language is painful, but using new one is not an overnight switch. And listening to you, Azamat, I feel like a lot of Ukrainians can find themselves in a bit privileged positions because we've been raised bilingual, and for us it's sometimes easy to switch between two languages. But what do you do if the assimilation went that long and that deep that people even lost the connection with their indigenous language, and it takes time and effort to rebuild and make it your own? And I just remember this story just for several days ago when I was asked by one of the editors if I want my piece to be translated to Russian, and it was written originally in English, and I was taken aback, and I was like, I'm not really interested in you translating it because I don't care if Russians read it. And they were like, it's not for Russians, it's for Central Asia, because we want to reach with this piece Central Asian audiences as well. And I was really shocked because I know that people mean well, but then I was like, asking them, if you really want to reach audiences in Central Asia and understand how Russian is prevalent, but still wouldn't be a better act of solidarity to translate it in Kazakh and Uzbek and Kyrgyz and Tajik? And they were taken aback by this question as well. So it runs so deep. Day by day, embodying new language, reconnecting with your own language. It's a journey, but personally, it brings me so much joy now, less pain than it used to in the beginning. So hopefully that will be a hopeful message to you, Azamat, as well.
Yeah, Maxim, if I can add one thing just quickly, I think there is a silver lining among my friends, right, who are ethnic Kazakh, grew up in similar situations to mine, 100% Russian speakers. they live, unlike me though, they live in Kazakhstan. Almost all of them are sending their children to schools where Kazakh is the language of instruction, right? So they're making that switch. In my case, because I am in the US, it's trickier, right? So the only source of sort of the language is for my kids is speaking with me. But for my guys my age who have children and who grew up as Russified Kazakhs, many of them are sending their kids to Kazakh schools. So I think the situation is definitely changing.
I wanted, Azamat, if you don't mind, to talk about, quickly to explain foreigners why it's important to pay attention now to the issue of the spelling of Kazakhstan, because internationally, Kazakhstan is being written and spelled through K. And I know you went in at length online explaining people why spelling out through Q is more appropriate and why it has actually to do everything with colonization and getting rid of colonial legacy. So can you educate us a bit on that issue?
Sure, absolutely.
If
yeah.
you don't mind.
Thank you for the question. Yeah. So if you look up Kazakhstan, if you Google Kazakhstan, right, it's going to come up as Kazakhstan, right? But that KH in the middle is supposed to represent the Russian sound he, right? Kazakhstan, which is not how Kazakh people themselves call their own country, right? So in Kazakh, it's Kazakhstan, right? So in Kazakhstan, if you go from Kazakhstan to sort of how it's written in English using Latin letters, it would go, Qazaqstan, Qazaq, with the two Qs. And it essentially then bypasses, the Russified version, right? Kazakhstan. It goes directly from Kazakh to English. And so I wrote about this, and it's connected to the effort that's been going on in the country to switch from Cyrillic to Latin alphabet, to switch the written Kazakh language from Cyrillic to Russian alphabet. From Cyrillic to Latin alphabet. And that effort obviously has immediately got a lot of pushback from Moscow, right? So there was quite a hysterical reaction from the Kremlin. People were saying, "Oh, that's a stab in the back. They're, betraying us." And so Kazakhstan had been forced to proceed very slowly with the switch to Latin of the written Kazakh language. But I do think that with time, the Q instead of the K and the Q in the middle instead of the KH is going to become the dominant form. And it's interesting that the change is already happening, and it's happening organically, sort of from the ground up. There is a local clothing brand that's quite popular called Kazakh Republic, right? And the way they spell it is Qazaq, Kazakh, right? Using
Yevgeniya actually brought me, which is now one of my favorite T-shirts from this brand.
Yeah,
I cherish it.
I like this stuff a lot. Yeah, and so they're doing it already, right? And young people really want their stuff, and it's not cheap either, right? And so the change is happening. A lot of time you see signs where the Kazakh language part is written using Latin letters. And so it's happening, but in a way, if you think that how prominent still the Russified the spelling is, it shows how powerful that Russian lens still is, right? How, Central Asia has historically been seen through the Russian lens, right? As sort of this underbelly of Russia, right? As part of the former Soviet Union. And I think it's time, we move away from that as much as possible. So I've been in my own writing, I've been trying, certainly on Twitter, I've been trying to use the Q instead of the K and the KH, and encouraging others to do the same. And it's a small change, but I think, sometimes the symbolic changes are important.
I think all Ukrainians who are listening now can vibe with us so much with our uphill battle that was like for many years trying to change the spelling of Ukrainian cities. And, Ukrainian geography from Russified English versions to Ukrainian. For example, Kyiv and Kharkiv and Odessa with one S. And for everybody would dismiss you right away saying, well, this is one letter. Why do you care so much? Or it doesn't really matter. And for people like us, it matters everything, because what can be more important than the name of the places you come from or your own names that are being misspelled in the language of colonizer? I think this is
absolutely, absolutely. Because I think certainly for Central Asia, for Central Asians, we've always been told that, oh, Kazakhs didn't have anything of their own. Kazakhs didn't have written language. Kazakhs didn't have anything. And so Russia was always seen as the great bringer of culture, of language, of words, of literature, of music, of everything, right? And so to go directly from Kazakh to English, bypassing Russian, I think is symbolically quite important, right? Whereas maintaining or insisting on using the Russian as the intermediary is not right anymore. And yeah, I think it's time for this to change.
Zhenya, speaking of really changing situations, part of our kind of routine that we often exchange stories or links on new Kazakh music, because I'm really into the scene recently as well. But to be honest, I think I started paying more attention when Kazakh artists started doing some collaborations with Ukrainian artists as well. One of my favorite track was by Kazakh artist Dude on the guitar and Ukrainian artist Krechet that they did on the on the genocide in Ukraine, and building so many cool but also powerful parallels between the Kazakhs surviving Russian-made genocide and Ukrainians surviving.
Международный маршрут, новый замут. Дома, мабуть, чуть не шарять за звук. Я тут, я рубаю правду матку. Як то, брати, хук не буде важко. Тану.
What would you recommend for everyone to pay attention in terms of Kazakh culture? What is happening there that the rest of the world definitely needs to see in terms of art, in terms of music? Is anything that is related to this reclaiming yourselves through cultures happening in Kazakhstan at the moment? Because I suspect that there is a lot of it that the rest of the world does not really expose well at the moment.
Thank you, Maxim, for this question. That's my favorite topic. But before telling what's new on the Kazakh music and culture scene, I just wanted to tell one story related to what we were talking before. I'm a big fan of Kazakh rap music, and I have a favorite band, which is called GHAD. And 10 years ago, I was at their concert live in my hometown, Almaty, as well. And at that point of time, they sing in Kazakh. There is no Russian intervention into their lyrics, as some of Kazakh musicians do. They have very poetic, very kind of high Kazakh. And I was the only non-ethnic Kazakh person at their concert. And later, I think few months later, I met them in the street and I was like, oh my God, you're these guys. And they're like, we know you. You were at our concert. And because I was the only one non-Kazakh ethnic person, they remembered me. That was 10 years ago, but now situation has changed. Now we have big festivals that are full of Kazakh new musicians, indie, Q-pop, Kazakh pop, like full of music, song primarily in Kazakh. And it makes my heart full of joy. I dreamt about it for a very, very long time. And now, once I'm gone outside of the country, it's finally happening. I would say biggest phenomena of Kazakh music scene, I would call 91. Together with my friend, documentary film director Katerina Suvorova, we've made a film which is called Face the Music in English. In Kazakh, it's called Men Sen Yemes. It's about how 91 has changed Kazakh youth culture and how it's done a lot for young people to start learning Kazakh language for serious, because this is a music band that is singing basically a Kazakh version of K-pop. And this blend of Kazakh language and global influence just made a great effect of people wanting to learn Kazakh. There are so many stories you can find on YouTube, like US citizens have learned Kazakh because of 91. They have a fan page in Bolivia. So they did great thing for Kazakh contemporary culture. They created this craving for learning Kazakh language. I don't say that there were no good Kazakh language band in Kazakhstan, but they were the game changer. If you're interested, I can share later the link to the documentary, which is available on YouTube with English subtitles. Жаймен дедім көрген әр әсерді мәлімдеймін сені бар нәрсемен кешкі түнгі және таңертеңгі біз үшін бұның бәрі өртенді көк сұрланды бұл түтіннен бір кінәлап бірін түртуде бәрі бөлінуде біртіндеп бірақ 7 миллиард бір бүтін ел жүрегім бәрі білет 7 миллиард бір бүтін ел бәрі білет 7 миллиард бір бүтін ел жүрегім бәрі білет 7 миллиард бір бүтін ел Yeah, I just wanted to say that now we have so many Kazakh singers, new Kazakh singers singing in different genres that I'm extremely proud of it. It's dude on the guitar, as you already mentioned, Желтоқсан.
Сіңгенде жүземе батпай
And I think we should be proud of the musicians that are considered to be traditional family party music toy in Kazakh, like Kairat Nurtas, and now they are the headliners of, so to say, contemporary music, Kazakh music festivals, which has never happened before. They were for more kind of family audience and family festivities. Right now and I think that's a big switch to realizing and being proud of where you're coming from. Oh, cinnamon.
We have to unfortunately wrap up, and we always ask this question since day one. I actually don't know if we asked it in episode 1, but this is our favorite question, and we slightly adapted it to the context of this episode, but I wanted to share with everyone, what does it mean for you to be Kazakh? We ask everyone what it means for them to be Ukrainians who we have here, but we would love to hear from you about your own interpretation of being Kazakh.
For me, it's a hard question because, I was afraid that it would hurt other people's feelings to call myself Kazakh. It was because, literally, part of my family can be considered colonizers, but they were not. They were also sent to Kazakhstan. So for me, it was very complicated to admit that. For now, I think what I feel is to be proud of Kazakh culture. And that's what I practice, what I preach. I'm telling it to everybody, about it to everybody. I think being proud of things done in Kazakhstan, great music, great films, great literature, not only Abay, there's plenty of other authors to read in Kazakh. I think that's what, for me, being Kazakh, to be proud of the place and good things that my country has produced.
For me, being Kazakh nowadays, me recognizing history, right? So recognizing that I was born in a society that was colonized by Russia, that in my own family, Kazakh language and Kazakh culture were almost completely crushed, but I think they were not destroyed entirely, and now they're coming back. And just the realization that I've been thinking recently. I've been thinking recently that the absolutely heroic fight that Ukrainians are fighting is in many ways a fight that's for all of us who were colonized by Russia. And it's definitely been a personal awakening for me to being Kazakh. I'm no longer, I don't know if the word ashamed is right, but I'm no longer embarrassed. I'm no longer uncomfortable. I no longer have this disdain for anything Kazakh, right? So I've grown sort of proud of being Kazakh. Kazakhs were nomadic people who lived in this beautiful but very harsh environment, survived, and we're still here. And I think the effort by Moscow to reverse time, right, to reassert control of former colonies is destined to fail, right? They're creating horrible tragedies in their sort of attempts to reverse the flow of time, but it's doomed. And I think Ukrainians, again, are sort of leading that fight and, of course, paying a terrible price. And just wanted to say that personally, my solidarity, my admiration for the people of Ukraine. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. Guys, Rahmet, to both of you. That was such a pleasure and such an honor to not only to feature your stories, but also to feature your own Ukrainian spaces, because in a way, I feel like we share so much in common, and it's an honor to amplify what you guys do and what you guys feel important to share with the rest of the world. So thank you so much for being here.
Maxim, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our wonderful guests for this last episode of season 3 of Ukrainian Spaces. I think it's one we'll remember, and I hope our listeners will also remember for the time being. But before we say goodbye to you, I just wanted to quickly explain to you what the end of our season means. It actually doesn't mean that we're stopping everything. But our new episodes will resume in fall. Whilst we kind of have these couple of months of a break between the seasons, you will keep getting remastered season 1 episodes, and we'll be re-uploading them so you can rediscover some of the older episodes that we recorded with Maxim from the very beginning. And of course, we'll have bonus content that will keep coming, bonus episodes, reading lists. All of these are on Patreon. So please, if you're not yet a patron and you want to get more in between our seasons, and also we also release bonus content when our seasons are in full swing, please don't forget to sign up. There's different tiers, so you can decide how much you want to donate to Ukrainian Spaces. But essentially, please just don't forget to share the content that we've been doing and our episodes with your family and friends, because obviously the more people that listen to us, the more we can educate the world about Ukraine through the voices of Ukrainians. And you can find all of this information and much more on Ukrainianspaces.com. But also just to say that we are going to launch a new fundraising campaign to be able to fund season 4 and make it better again than season 1, season 2, season 3. Each season we've been trying to make the experience of listening to our podcast better for our listeners. So we'll be launching a new fundraising campaign on July 15th because additional resources will basically make what we do even better for everyone. So thank you so much once again to our wonderful guests, to our patrons, to our listeners, to everyone who's been amplifying our messages, to our team, to Tatiana and Solomia. But before we finish, I would like to pass to Maxim for a slightly different ending to our episode. Maxim.
Yeah. Well, actually, we planned for this season 10 episodes, not 9. And I think one of the people that we always wanted to book for this season, but I failed to do that because schedules never worked, was Victoria Nelina, a Ukrainian novelist and writer and a poet. And unfortunately, Victoria was murdered at the beginning of July in Kramatorsk by Russian missile. And I think this, unfortunately, one of the episodes that will never happen because of that. And Victoria is not the only Ukrainian writer who got murdered in what she personally also called another chapter of so-called executed Renaissance to Ukrainian culture. So to honor her memory, we posted some of her famous quotes online on our social media accounts, but I also wanted to end the season and end this episode with her poem that was translated from Ukrainian to English. It's called Poem About a Crow. So this is how it goes. In a barren springtime field stands a woman dressed in black, crying her sisters' names like a bird in the empty sky. She'll cry them all out for herself. The one that flew away too soon, the one that had begged to die, the one that couldn't stop death, the one that has not stopped waiting, the one that has not stopped believing, the one that still grieves in silence. She'll cry them all into the ground as though sowing the field with pain. And from pain and the names of women, her new sisters will grow from the earth, and again will sing joyfully of life. But what about her, the crow? She will stay in the field forever, because only this cry of hers holds all the swallows in the air. Do you hear how she calls each one by her name? Don't forget to amplify Ukrainian voices, as many as possible, before they're silenced. Thank you so much for spending your time on this episode, but staying with us and amplifying Ukrainian spaces throughout the whole season. We'll see you and hear you soon. That's it for now, apart from one thing. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.